Please welcome Teddy Goff, Chief Digital Strategist of Hillary for America and partner at Precision Strategies, and Greg Gittrich, Chief Content Officer at Mashable.
Hey everybody, thanks so much for coming. My name is Greg Gittrich and I lead content here at Mashable. We've had a great day so far and I'm thrilled to be joined by Teddy Goff. Before we dive into questions, I'm going to ask Teddy to take a minute or so to tell everybody a little bit about his background and fascinating career. Right now, of course, he's the Chief Digital Strategist for Hillary Clinton, so fairly busy man.
Well, thank you so much for having me. Thanks for putting us in the coveted, immediately post-United States Secretary of State slot. Anyway, thank you all for being here. This is really, this is a cool event. So let's see. I am one of the thousands of people who graduated college right around the time that Senator Obama started running for president. I was one of the one of the millions who did that, and one of the lucky thousands who was able to get a position on his campaign. I started in a department that we then called New Media. People don't call it that anymore. When there were probably 9 or 10 people in that department. And it was really this fascinating experience of being at the juncture of these two phenomena, social media and the internet, which was really like getting going, and then obviously the Obama campaign and what happened in that election. So I'm sure we'll talk about that a bit more. Moved back to New York where I'm from, wound up having the incredible honor of being placed in charge of the department that had by then been named the Digital Department in 2012. Really had not expected to do another presidential campaign, by the way, but sort of wound up doing one more. Came back to New York again. Really did not expect to do another presidential campaign, and somehow wound up doing one more. So I think this time is really my last.
Until 4 years from now.
Yeah, we'll see.
So Time described Teddy's work as, quote, redefining the limits of viral politics. And hearing that and the experience you've had, can you walk us through how much things have changed since 2008?
Sure. You know, I think people look back on the 2008 Obama campaign as having been the first sort of social media campaign, and absolutely it was. But I think we sort of lose track of how new all that stuff was and how relatively small its footprint was, relative to today. So in 2008, Facebook was just in the process. It had been a closed network where you could be friends with your people from your school. It opened itself up to high schools over the course of that campaign. It was really, a very big deal, obviously, but nowhere near the kind of global juggernaut and media entity and everything that it is today. Twitter was in a totally, sort of early adopter mode. We had a 5-digit number of followers on election day. I mean, there were, I used to say you would have gotten laughed at if you talked about a Twitter strategy. That was like not a thing that existed. Even the iPhone, it feels almost impossible to remember a pre-smartphone existence for a lot of people. But the iPhone was released in the summer of 2007 when both Senator Obama and Senator Clinton were already running. So all this stuff was very new. Fast forward to 2012, President Obama had 34 million Facebook fans. He had 27 million Twitter followers. And the number that I always thought was, obviously the smartphone was in near ubiquitous usage. And the number that I always thought was most interesting was that of those 34 million Facebook fans, those people were friends with 99% of the United States Facebook using population, which is more than the number of people who vote. And so in a very short span of time, this stuff has gone from being, a sort of experimental, early adopter phase, a way to reach young people, to being a way that you can reach everybody in the United States and do it via the people they actually trust, because we are obviously in an era where people don't trust politics, they don't trust politicians, they don't trust, or increasingly may not even have to watch ads, but they trust what they hear from their friends. And so I think the interesting thing for campaigns, you've got to learn how to do different kinds of things. You've got to understand the Facebook algorithm. You've got to understand how to do media mix. And all that stuff. But I think the most interesting thing is that I believe the sort of hardwiring of the voter's brain is changing. And it's changing in a lot of different ways. Some really encouraging, some a little bit frightening if you look at the current election. I think if you look at the issues that have where we've seen the most progress in the shortest span of time in the social media era, I think about issues like LGBT rights, criminal justice reform, the very kinds of issues where when you give more people, more of the sort of ordinary people who are actually affected by these issues, more of a voice, that has the power to change people's minds, and we've seen really rapid change. At the same time, we've seen the sort of mainstreaming and normalization of some really scary stuff that we'd probably all sort of wish weren't able to be exposed to millions of people at lightning speed on the internet. So it's interesting.
So, and just to go back to 2008 one more time, I think we all tend to forget how difficult it was to watch video, to publish video, which obviously has changed in a big way. So right now, how have you changed your tactics and strategy and day-to-day to take advantage of video literally being everywhere?
Well, look, I think video is some of the most important work we do. We have a video team of about 30. We are always on the road with Secretary Clinton, now always on the road with Senator Kaine, on the road with Senator Sanders and Senator Warren and President Clinton and President Obama when they do events for us. I think every social network, I think basically every social network sort of inevitably, the arc of a social network bends toward becoming a video sharing network. And so Facebook is, predominantly a video platform for us. Twitter, not predominantly, but increasingly. Obviously, that's what Snapchat is all about. It's interesting because at the same time that it's this incredible new tool and we get to tell so many cool stories and convey information in really interesting ways, we're also in competition with like everybody. I don't think that when we're putting a video on Facebook, there's no individual human who's deciding whether to watch our video or Donald Trump's video at that moment. You're deciding whether to watch our video or, last night's sports highlights or whatever your best friend just posted to Snapchat or, the email from your spouse or your mom or your boss or, and so you're in a ridiculously competitive content market, in competition with everybody. And it forces you to, I think this, has been good for politics, and I think in a lot of ways it's been bad for politics. It forces you to have something really interesting to say if people are going to decide to spend 6 or 15 or 30 seconds with you relative to something that they, that their best friend has shared with them.
So given that, how do you turn the social engagement that you have on all these platforms into real action on the ground, whether it's getting people to the polls or driving a cause?
I fundamentally believe, and I think there's a lot of data to back this up, that the idea of like slacktivism or however you want to put it is a myth. And in fact, the people who may first engage with an issue or with a campaign by way of watching a video or seeing a tweet or whatever, people disparage that and they say it's cheap and they say it's easy, but it actually makes them more likely, not less, to then go take an actual action. And so, this is something that we really care about on our campaign, but it's something I think you're seeing in every sort of issue advocacy organization and space that exists. More people are more engaged in politics and more engaged in, civic activity than before, and their first toe in the water is the internet. So, tactically, we try to sort of smooth that path for them. We try to make sure that if you're, signing up for our email list, it's really easy for you to volunteer. If you volunteer, you get a phone call right away from a person who tells you how to do it, and and makes the process as sort of satisfying for you as possible. But the fact of the matter is, the more exposure the easy stuff gets to more people, the more likely they are to eventually do the hard stuff.
Gotcha. And you touched on this a little bit a few minutes ago, but what's the downside of being in such a connected world? What are the dangers in your mind?
Trump's Twitter account. I think. Thank you. I think we've all been thinking about this a lot, and I think I've been thinking recently about I think in general the internet is making the world a better place, and over the long term, if you connect more people to each other and you provide more people more access to information, that's going to be a good thing over the long term. And my focus has by and large been in American politics, but you think about what access to information means for the world, and it's going to do a lot more good than it does harm. On the harm side, though. I think there's two dynamics that I've been thinking about a lot. The first is that I think the internet is better at revealing injustices and outrages than it is at giving you tools to do something about them. Or it's better, it accelerates the process by which you find out about the outrages more than it accelerates the process by which you can fix them. And I think that creates a sense of frustration in the country that is palpable. And so, now, I think knowing about outrages is basically a good thing. We all should know about police shootings and and stories of some of you may have read this story about homelessness in San Francisco that ran in the Times today. Sunlight on those things is good, but to the extent that the internet provides the sunlight but not the means to do something about it, I think people get really outraged. And I think the sense of despair and of anxiety in the country is to a large degree a product of everybody being increasingly all day on Facebook, at work, on Twitter, on whatever, exposed to really frustrating stuff, and yet the legislative process appears to be as broken as ever, and yet changing hearts and minds takes a long time. And so there's an asymmetry there that can produce some bad outcomes. And I think my second thing I was going to say is one of those bad outcomes, and we already kind of touched on this, but I think people being exposed to some of the injustices that happen in our country and the world is a good thing, basically. People being exposed to racist, sexist speech and anti-immigrant rhetoric and conspiracy theories and all this other stuff that is like all of a sudden front and center in our politics is a less good thing, in my opinion.
Does that keep you up at night? Is there something that...
I think it does, because I think I personally believe that Donald Trump will not be our next president, but I believe that the people he cool. But I think first of all, I think the people who are supporting him, they're going to have to. There will be other candidates who appeal to those people going forward, and so he may not win this election, but someone like him may very well win the next one. People like that will absolutely already have, and I think increasingly may win governorships and senator seats and state house seats and things like that. And I think to the extent, the internet has been an unbelievable tool giving people like, I'm guessing everyone in this room, ways to, get information about the issues we care about. Secretary Kerry was just talking about climate change, you name it, and organize around those issues. Well, it's also given those same tools and that same power for people to organize and sort of form communities around hate. And there's more of us than there are of them, but not by as comfortable a margin as I would like. And so, you asked about on-the-ground action. That's why people like the folks in this room, we've got to work so hard to make sure we don't lose these fights. Because I think, I think on-the-ground action and real, activism and real work toward winning elections, work toward changing laws, work toward, work for charities and so forth, is at risk of being, we could lose some of these fights, and we can't let that happen.
So before we wrap up, with everybody here hearing all these interesting conversations all day, what advice would you give them? There's so much competition, so much noise across digital, across social, but if they really want to get their word out and drive real action, what would you advise them to do?
There's no, I don't know that there is a one-size-fits-all answer to that. I would say, though, this is a thing, after the 2012 election, I went through President Obama's YouTube page and sorted by view count and noticed that the videos that I just thought were really good were the ones that had the most views. And the things that we put out because we had to get a message out, or we were in a rush and it just wasn't our best work, were the things that didn't get a lot of views. So you can't necessarily solve for virality. You absolutely can't guarantee that as an outcome. In general, better content is going to get more traction, and worse content is going to get less traction. And so I think all you can really absolutely guarantee that you're going to do is try to say things that are true, say it in a funny way, a compelling way, an emotional way, whatever is the way that it's actually interesting to people, but make sure it rings true and it's good. And while it may not find an audience, it's going to be more likely to than if it's not true and not good.
Great. Well, thank you for taking the time.
My pleasure. Thanks, guys.